Good morning, everyone. It is 12:30 in Greece and 11:30 in Central Europe. Thank you very much for joining this European Year of Skills virtual get-together. My name is Jasper van Loo and I work at Cedefop as coordinator in the Department for VET and Skills. Now, at Cedefop, we organize virtual get-togethers throughout the European Year of Skills, and that means until May next year, because the European year is not a calendar year, it actually ends then. Before we go to the opening of this virtual get-together, please allow me to quickly go over the housekeeping rules. They should appear on the screen about now. First, if you have not done so, please name yourself, first and last name, and country or organization. Second, webcams will be automatically disabled and you will be muted throughout the meeting. But that does not mean that you cannot interact with us and ask questions. We actually hope that you will do that, and you can use the chat function in Teams to ask questions. You can also interact via Cedefop social media channels, and also feel free to use the Teams chat to contact our support team should you experience any technical problem. Now at Cedefop, we take continuous improvement seriously. Therefore, at the end of this event, we will ask you to take 2 minutes of your time to complete an evaluation form. You'll find the link in the chat. Finally, this event is being recorded so that people that were interested to join today but could not make it can watch it via our YouTube channel afterwards. Now, actually, one of the persons who was very interested to join us today but couldn't make it because he's stuck in some kind of traffic is Jürgen Siebel, the Executive Director of Cedefop. He's asked me to take over his part of the opening. Maybe we get a chance to see him later in the event, still quickly. So just a few words about this 6th virtual get-together. First of all, it's a very special one because we co-organize it with our sister agency, ETF. Now a little bit about Cedefop. As the European Agency for VET and Skills, Cedefop produces evidence on labour market trends and skill needs, and we do that to support the EU VET, the skills, the digital and the green transition policy agendas. Now, that evidence we call skills intelligence, and skills intelligence is actually much more than simply factual data or statistics. We often start with numbers, but we add to that analysis, synthesis and interpretation to turn data and empirical findings into smart and actionable insights. One of our key European Year of Skill messages is that user-centered skills intelligence helps translate trends and policy aims into actionable learning and matching opportunities. We see the European Year of Skills as an opportunity to put our skills intelligence for the EU, the member states, and also Norway and Iceland in the spotlight. But we do much more than that. We continuously develop our skills intelligence and promote good practice in developing it to unleash the potential of skills at the levels where transitions happen. Think of sectors, regions, and communities. Now, this is a simplification, but we can think that we have 3 main types of skills intelligence. First, skills intelligence that looks at what mega trends mean for labor markets a decade or so ahead. Then we think, for instance, about skill forecasts or also foresight. Then we have skills intelligence that looks at the skill needs that are emerging today. At Cedefop, we do that through online job advertisements. And the third type of skills intelligence actually looks at the match between skills, jobs, and people, and at how to improve that match. Now, in today's virtual get-together, we zoom in on the third type. And we do that by looking at one of Cedefop's flagship surveys, the 2nd European Skills and Jobs Survey. We will look at what the survey tells us about the impact of digitalisation on skill needs and also on skill matches and mismatches. Cedefop will do that for the EU member states and Norway and Iceland. Now, in the past few years, we've worked quite closely with the ETF to make the 2nd Skills and Jobs Survey possible in some of the ETF partner countries. That means that we will also have first results and findings from European neighborhood countries. To tell us a little more about that, I would like to hand over to Executive Director Pilvi Torsti from the ETF. And actually, I would like to start by saying that it looks like today we will have many opportunities to learn about digital trends, digital skills, and digital divides. Now, just to ask you two questions. How important is the survey for the countries outside the EU that took part in it? And are some of the findings already making a difference? The Director Torsti, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and hello all participants on my behalf. By way of opening, as the director of the European Training Foundation ETF, I could answer very, very briefly to the questions about the importance and already usefulness, saying in a way yes and yes. And I thought to support this answer by developing further three dimensions that I think also complement very much what was said already on behalf of CEDEFOP. So thank you very much for the openings. So why is it important and significant that it was possible for ETF to use this, I would say, really wonderful methodology developed by CEDEFOP for the European Skills and Job Survey? So my first of the three points would be a little bit of all, given also the relating to the context, namely that as ETF works in the EU neighborhood, in the countries not members of the Union, but neighboring us in the East and South, also Central Asia and Africa. But in this context, this survey was done in the Western Balkan countries. So of course, now we are in the current geopolitical situation in a new context, in particular in certain countries because of the enlargement agenda. And with that enlargement agenda, of course, the survey data comes in very timely. It allows now evidence-based analysis for planning for the deployment of lifelong learning policies that would be in line in with the European Skills Agenda and the Action Plan for European Pillar of Social Rights. So in this enlargement context, the survey brings the important evidence on the working conditions, labor protection of different groups of workers, which are all relevant directly to the acquis, in particular to the Chapter 19 of the processes that the various countries are or have entered. And of course, more specifically in this enlargement context, the survey provides information on the share of workers that are exposed to hazardous materials or work conditions or work in the precarious or informal jobs, all of great interest for the Union, but also for the countries themselves. So that would be my first answer to the importance, that it's also the timing and the geopolitics that have increased perhaps the importance of this evidence-based data, evidence-based possibilities this data allows. The second point is that how valuable it was for us to have the survey method at our disposal and to be able to work together with CEDEFOP on this. So when we talk about partnership, this is of very deep nature in that sense that there was a great method developed which now allows for us to collect data in our partner countries that otherwise would not be available. Until now, the knowledge has been limited when it comes to the extent of skills mismatches and the also impact of digitalisation and automation on the labour demand and reskilling and upskilling strategies. And taking the post-pandemic world, there are also new trends that have accelerated in the work life, of course, due to e-commerce, automation and remote work. So we can really say that the survey can fill this gap and provide answers to these questions and really strengthening the intelligence of ours in the partner countries. And if you contextualize how important that is, it is where the services that ETF provides based on its strategies actually skills foresight, system analysis, and evaluation, and as a result of those two, policy advice. So this is really at the core of our work to be able to do meaningfully our work. And as a third element, so if you have the first, the context, enlargement context, the second, the really ability to get new knowledge and data. The third one, of course, has been really the ability to build on the methodological work of CEDEFOP, as I already mentioned. Now we have the data from ETF partner countries that we can compare countries and regions both within and outside the EU, and through that understand the extent to which the digital transition really vary from countries with different levels of economic development, with different labor market characteristics and skills-related policies. So I cannot underline more, I think, the value of this data, and I look forward also personally to forthcoming publications. So finally, to close the opening and let the experts speak, when looking at some of the findings in the Western Balkans, I would just mention two or three figures to give you a sense what this comparative element allows for us. So when we, for instance, look at the use of digital devices at work, there was only 1 in 10, in other words, 10% among the EU citizens who said that they did not use digital devices. So 1 in 10. While among the adult workers in the Western Balkans, it was 1 in 5, so 20%. So we already see a major difference there. Or another figure, about 40% of the workers in the Western Balkans reported to participate in job-related training in the past 12 months, while the same figure inside the EU was around 62%, so 62 and 40. And we all know what the limited participation in training means, in particular when it comes to improving sort of new set of skills, digital skills, AI skills, etc. So this allows me to, or brings me to conclude that when we look at the results and these mismatches in the Western Balkans, there is particular worry that the share of such workers is especially high among young and educated workers. So there really seems to be an underutilization of the existing human capital, which when we take the aims of the Year of Skills, for instance, is of course an interesting finding, but also something to act upon and take as part of our policy advice work. So with these words, thank you very much for the organizers and looking forward to the continued event. Welcome on my behalf too, and the event is opened.
Thank you very much, and I think we really appreciate that. Apart from the context and also the potential of the findings, you also highlight, the cooperation and the way we leverage our expertise together to make this happen. I think that's fantastic. Now, in your words, I think it's time to let the experts speak, and the first expert who will speak is my colleague Konstantinos Pouliakas. He's an expert at CEDEFOP, and he was actually the core expert who was responsible for developing not only this European Skills and Job Survey, but also the first European Skills and Job Survey that took place about 10 years ago. Kostas will talk about setting Europe on a course for a human digital transition, and I would like to give you the floor. Kostas, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and welcome to all of our participants. Thank you very much, Jasper, for the kind introduction. My name is Konstantinos Pouliakas. I'm an expert at the Department for VET and Skills at CEDEFOP. And as Jasper said, I've had the pleasure and the honor of being responsible since 2011. When we started at CEDEFOP developing the first wave of the European Skills and Job Survey, a survey which has since matured, and we reached at a stage where we carried out the second wave, started preparing for the second wave in 2017, 2018. And we are now at the stage where We are happy to have shared our resources also with the European Training Foundation, our sister agency, and have managed to carry out the survey in 35 countries across Europe and the EU neighborhood. So allow me to share my presentation. Okay, can you see it well?
Good, all good, Costa.
Good. So as Jasper mentioned, the European Skills and Job Survey is one of the core components of Cedefop Skills Intelligence Arsenal, along with our individual efforts to try to anticipate future skill needs with the European Skills Forecast and to try to understand current and dynamic and real-time emerging skill needs using our online job advertisements tool. What the European Skills and Job Survey manages to do is to give us in-depth insights on structural changes taking place in European labor markets. And in particular, it has become, in my view, one of Europe's main surveys providing robust information covering the representative portion of the European labor force. And provides robust information in relation to issues such as to what extent European workers need different type of skills in order to be able to carry out the tasks in their jobs, information about skill mismatches in the workforce, and also information about the type of technological and other changes taking place in the workplaces of European workers. And the second European Skills and Job Survey in particular had a specific focus on trying to understand better the element of the digitalization. Recall that the second waves started to be developed in around 2017-18. And that was a period where we were coming out of the great financial crisis, and it was a period where there was a lot, sort of eruption of the debate about the so-called future of work and how new digital technologies, in particular artificial intelligence and advanced robotics, are likely to decimate a significant part of jobs in not only the European but in global labor markets. So at that time, we felt that there was a need to collect information from a wide segment of the European labor force. We felt that there was a need to collect information which would enable us to understand to a better extent to what extent are EU workers being affected by digitalization. And of course, there was a need to even be better in terms of defining what exactly do we mean by digitalization. So working together with an expert group comprising of some of Europe's best experts on issues related to digitalization and skills, some of which will also be talking at later parts of this event. Working together with them, we divided a concept. We divided the second European Skills and Job Survey instrument, where essentially what we tried to do is we tried to address to what extent workers need different type of skills in order to carry out the tasks in their jobs. We tried to measure to what extent EU workers need different types of digital skills at a different level. And also, we wanted to relate and understand to what extent is this take-up of new digital technologies affecting, if not the quantity of work, but in essence, the quality of work. So we wanted to emphasize much more on understanding whether or not the take-up of digitalization in EU workplaces is positive or negative for the job satisfaction of workers, for their wages, for the extent to which they may be feeling greater or less job insecurity. So in order to do so, we had to develop better ways of measuring some of these phenomena. And of course, the major value added of a survey such as the European Skills and Job Survey is that the information collected is representative. In other words, we try to sample a random portion of the EU adult workforce. And we did so by targeting the 27 member states plus Norway and Iceland. So between spring and summer of 2020, we surveyed around 46,000 EU adult workers aged between 25 and 64 years old. And we did so using a combination, a combined sampling methodology, where on the one hand, we collected interviews using random sampling with telephone interviews. And on the other hand, we also try to supplement these sample sizes with online interviews. Trying to combine these two different methodologies using appropriate weighting and statistical techniques so that at the end of the day, we could be assured that the samples of adult workers that we have from the different EU countries can indeed provide us with a representative picture spanning different occupational and industrial groups, also people of different age groups, gender, and education. And to manage to understand how and what do people do in their jobs, what type of tasks they carry out in their jobs, and also what type of digital skills they require, we did so using a specific methodology called the task-based approach, where in essence we were asking workers to what extent were they doing specific type of activities in the last month as part of their main job. And by asking these questions, we can get information about the type of literacy, numeracy, interpersonal, problem-solving skills that people have to encounter as part of their regular tasks in their job. And also in particular, we try to understand the intensity of the digital skills required in people's jobs. So we ask specific questions about to what extent people are using computer devices to, for instance, email or use word processing in their jobs or use spreadsheets, going all the way up to whether or not they have to code and program as part of their job. So with this methodology, we can get a sort of scaling, providing us with information about the extent to which workers may need a basic, a moderate, or a more advanced level of digital skills. And then we paid a lot of attention as well to try to understand to what extent workers are affected by technological change. And we did so by asking specific questions focused on whether or not they had to learn new computer software or new computerized machinery as part of their main jobs. And this survey took place basically during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there was an expectation that there would be also a big share of the workforce who would tell us that they had to learn new digital technologies. And of course, the focus also was on trying to understand to what extent learning about these new digital technologies, to what extent it had implications for automating or complementing the job tasks of workers. So the focus of this event is very much on digital divides, and I will present to you now some evidence from the European Skills and Jobs Survey, which basically highlights many different types of digital divides permeating the EU workforce. One of the most notable divides has to do with the fact that, especially during the COVID pandemic, as we know, there was a big increase in the share of workers who had to work from home and who had to do remote forms of work. What we observe with the data that we collected as part of the European Skills and Jobs Survey is that there was a big variation between EU countries in the share of EU workers who basically worked from home, with some countries such as Norway and Sweden and Netherlands having a big share, even close to half of the adult workforce being able to work from home, whereas in other countries such as Romania and Italy, the shares were significantly lower. But moving even beyond the country dimension, it is also now very clear that the take-up of working from home was very much skewed towards high-skilled professional groups, individuals who were in possession of higher levels of educational qualifications. So it's apparent that what happened also, and what was accentuated during the COVID-19 pandemic, was that you had a segment of the workforce who had the opportunity to exploit the remote work option to continue doing their jobs, whereas on the other hand, you had a significant part of the workforce who were medium and lower skilled, who were in specific type of industries where the technical feasibility of carrying out remote work did not enable them and allow them to undertake working from home, who were in essence in a worse position, who didn't have this option of remote working. Then, when you try to understand to what extent EU workers had to learn new digital technologies as part of their main job during this period, 2020-2021, again, we see a relative big variation in the extent to which EU workers were exposed to new digital technologies. So workers in Finland and Ireland and Sweden very much so had to learn to use new digital technologies to carry out their job tasks, as opposed to workers in Bulgaria, Cyprus, Poland, who around a third of the workforce had to learn new digital technologies, but this was a much significantly lower incidence and proportion. As I mentioned to you earlier, much of the debate on the future of work has focused on the extent to which new digital technologies are likely to destroy a big part of the labor force, a big part of employment, with a famous study now by Brian Osborne of the University of Oxford claiming that even half of all jobs could be potentially automated because of the advancement of new digital technologies, in particular AI. What we try to do is to measure, as I mentioned, specifically at individual level, at the level of a job, to what extent workers had to learn new digital technologies, and if these new digital technologies actually had an automating effect on their job tasks. And what we observe is that 14% of EU workers basically told us that when we learned these new digital technologies, some of our job tasks actually were destroyed. We no longer had to carry them out. But a big part of this 14% at the same time, simultaneously, also had to learn new or different type of job tasks. So the net balance may be positive. It's typically the issue that for those individuals who had to learn new digital technologies, around 31% of the EU workforce, the take-up of digital technologies is associated with the so-called reinstatement effect. In other words, the fact that these workers simultaneously have to learn new, different job tasks. And only 4% of the EU workforce essentially is that part which has solely a negative outcome. In other words, for this 4%, the having to learn new digital technologies was associated specifically with task destruction. An important divide also is apparent in relation to which part of the workforce typically sees only such automating impacts. And we observe in our data that these are typically males, lower educated workers, workers who are in more routine type of jobs, workers in the agricultural, finance and utility sectors. So again, there is a specific divide in the extent to which, on the one hand, you have a specific segment of the workforce who learn digital technologies with an automating effect, versus other type of workers, typically more higher educated workers in non-routine jobs, for whom there can be a virtuous effect of digital technologies. For the majority of workers in our sample, even though, as I said, the concern typically is on the job destruction capabilities of new digital technologies, what we observe is that around half of the EU workforce acknowledges that, in essence, because of the take-up of new digital technologies, they will have to learn new knowledge, new skills to be able to continuously carry out their job tasks. So what we have tried to focus on also in our surveys to try to measure what is the learning potential to what extent the EU workforce could be potentially trained and further develop their digital skills. To do so, we have measured how many EU workers may be carrying out specific digital activities at their job, but at a very low level. And we have added also the share of workers who do not use any digital devices in their job, and who also told us that they do not know how to carry out these specific digital activities. So combining these two groups, we essentially measure to what extent, for instance, EU workers could be potentially trained in even the most basic of digital tasks, such as learning how to browse the internet better, emailing, using social media for their work, word processing, using spreadsheets. And we think that we find that a significant part of the workforce, around 20 to even 40% of the EU workforce, stands to benefit from additional upskilling, even in these relatively basic digital activities. On the other side of the spectrum, we observe that only around 7 to 10% of the EU workforce has to carry out relatively advanced digital activities in their jobs, involving database management, programming, coding, and ICT maintenance. Which brings me to one of the most important digital divides that we observe in our European Skills and Job Survey analysis, which is that we can also see that there are big disparities in between the groups of the adult workforce who actually try to further develop their digital skills by participating in different types of non-formal education and training activities. So in the European Skills and Job Survey, we specifically try to measure to what extent EU workers participate in further education and training, and whether or not that further education and training was specifically geared towards the development of their digital skills. And what we can see is that despite this relatively marked learning potential that I mentioned to you before, only about a quarter of the EU workforce said that they undertook specific training to develop their digital skills. And again, we can observe these relatively significant disparities between population groups. So we can see that typically higher educated people were more likely to try to develop their digital skills, people in more skilled occupations, people who are in larger sized firms, people in urban areas, and also typically males are more likely to undertake digital skills training. Of course, further analysis that we are undertaking, also in cooperation with our colleagues from the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, is highlighting that to a significant extent, these differences that we can observe in the raw data very much come down to the fact that, for instance, females are less likely to be training in their digital skills, but this is because they are not managing to be in jobs demanding a high level of skills and digital skills. So if we do manage, in a sense, to improve access of females or access of people in rural areas into jobs which demand a higher level of skills and digital skills, we are also likely to see an improvement in their participation in education and training to develop their digital skills. Another important finding has to do with the fact that we can see that to a significant extent, people who are not participating in digital skills training are doing so because they are not adequately informed, or that they do not have healthy attitudes towards technology. Typically, people who are afraid of digital technologies to a greater extent are those who are less likely to participate in education and training. And typically people who are not being exposed to digital technologies in their workplace are also less likely to participate in digital skills training. So what policymakers have to do is they really have to try to overcome this information deficit and also try to cultivate the minds and the attitudes of people towards the absorption of digital technologies, and to encourage people not to be afraid when it comes to the integration of digital technologies in workplaces and as part of people's jobs. A final wedge that we can also observe in terms of the impact of digital technologies has to do with the labor market outcomes. So we also observe that depending on the type of digital technology that people have to learn or have to use in their job, you can also see that there are different types of effects. So people who had to learn digital technologies in the form of working more closely with robots or working more with computerized machinery seem to be more afraid of the potential negative effects that these digital technologies may have in terms of them losing their job in the medium-term future. This is not the case for individuals who are learning digital technologies, but in the form of, for instance, computer software, who, even though we can still see that 40% are basically afraid that they may lose their job in the foreseeable future, this is less compared to those who had to learn digital technologies which are more related to robotics and computerized machinery. I conclude by mentioning that all of the key indicators and data related to the European Skills and Job Survey has been made available as part of a dedicated online tool that Cedefop has developed and which you can access at our web portal. You can go and you can download a wide range of different data on different type of focus areas such as skill demands, digitalization, skill mismatches, and training. And we have recently launched a specific call for papers where we are inviting researchers and interested parties to develop research proposals, to submit them to Cedefop, asking for access to the second European Skills and Job Survey microdata so that they can develop research papers to be potentially presented at a specific workshop that we're already organizing to take place in December of next year. So I thank you very much for your attention, and all of the evidence and information can be accessed at a specific policy brief that we published last year, and also the flagship report Setting Europe on Course for a Human Digital Transition that is also available on Cedefop's website. Thank you. So what I would like to do in order to continue with the flow of the event is I would like to invite our esteemed colleague Eva Jansova, who is a human capital development and labor market expert from our sister agency, the European Training Foundation. And Eva has been key in further developing and ensuring that the European Skills and Job Survey is carried out in an additional 7 countries in the Western Balkans and Israel on behalf of the ETF. Eva, thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours so that you can present to us the ESGS2 results, but from the countries that you have surveyed.
Thank you, Kostas. I will now share my presentation. I hope it's visible. My role today is indeed to present the first selected findings from the European Skills and Job Survey in ETF partner countries. And I would like again to thank Cedefop for the opportunity that was given to ETF to implement this survey, and also to be able to compare and share the results. Before starting, I would like to also reinforce the messages that were given by our director on the importance of the survey, because it can bring not only the novel evidence to the countries with which we work, so the countries outside of the EU, but it's also very, let's say, practical tool and important input that can be provided for the EU planning and also the support that will be given, especially to the enlargement region, which is very, very crucial in the context, in the current context, and also given the fact that the enlargement has become again one of the key priorities of the EU in the upcoming period. So just quickly about the survey. We implemented the survey in 6 countries. So in 5 Western Balkan economies: Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Serbia, and also Israel. And we followed the CEDEFOP methodology that was applied in the EU and EU plus countries, which then of course means that we can compare the results between the two data set, having of course in mind that the timing of the implementation is different. As Kostas mentioned, this survey focuses on the adults aged 25 to 64 in wage and salary employment. So this was, of course, kept also in the survey implemented in the ETF partner countries. In Western Balkan economies, we used the multi-stage cluster sample and face-to-face interviews, while in Israel we relied on online panels, so the web interviewing. In case of the ETF managed survey, the sample is approximately of 1,000 respondents per each country. So today I will focus on few findings and I will also maybe repeat some of the elements or some of the questions and indicators presented by Kostas. So it's very important for us to be able also to compare and in a way benchmark the results against the EU. And I will focus on several elements such as skills requirements, changes at the workplace that are connected also with the introduction of digital technologies. And I will also provide some elements related to job-related training. In the presentation, I will focus on the enlargement region, so on Western Balkan, while also providing some information on Israel. However, we need to keep in mind that the results for Israel are quite distinct if compared to the 5 Western Balkan countries. So what can we see from the survey and what can we say about the jobs in Western Balkan 5 economies when it comes to skills requirements? So if compared to the EU 27, we see rather, let's say, modest levels of skills and types of skills that are required in the existing jobs. So as an example, I provide here, for example, that in almost half of the jobs, no reading skills are required in all the 5 Western Balkan countries, ranging from 40% in Bosnia and Herzegovina to 49% in North Macedonia. The similar patterns can be also seen when it comes, for example, to numeracy. Large share of workers doesn't need or is not required to use any numeracy skills, while the share of workers that is required to use advanced math skills is rather low, especially if compared to the EU or also Israel. What we can see also differences among the different groups of workers. So a higher degree, let's say, of the foundation skills is required by female workers, younger workers, and also those with tertiary education or employees holding skilled occupations. We also see, as this survey allows to look at different other types of skills, problem solving, creativity, social skills, and we see that a large majority of workers is using or is required to use such skills. What we can, however, also see that the job complexity is very relatively limited, especially if compared to EU 27. This we can see especially among the groups of workers working in elementary or semi-skilled occupations. And we also see a relatively high degree of routinization in the existing jobs. About 2/3 of workers work in jobs that can be characterized as having medium or high level of routinization, and this also can be observed among those or employees having skilled occupations. We, of course, looked also at the digital skills, which is, let's say, the core of the survey and also the core of the presentation by Kostas. We also followed the same methodology looking at the digital skills intensity index that was presented previously, looking at different tasks that workers are required to perform in their jobs, ranging from the simple ones to more complex ones, to understand the level or the degree of the digital skills that is required in the existing jobs. So as for example, the foundation skills, we see that the majority of the jobs in Western Balkan economies require no or very low skills when it comes to the digital skills. So only a small portion of the workers, ranging from 6% in Serbia to 9% in Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo, are required, for example, to program, to code, or to manage more complex databases, which, if compared to the EU plus countries, is very, very low. Also, when we looked at who are actually the workers that work in jobs requiring, let's say, high degree of digital skills intensity, so we see that those are mostly, as expected, workers with tertiary education, workers who work in skilled occupations, and in case of Western Balkan economies, younger workers in particular. So despite, let's say, the modest degree of skills required in the current jobs, we still see that some changes are happening, changes at the workplace. So that's what Kostas also showed. We asked the question as well on the degree to which new digital technologies are introduced at the workplace. And we see again picture which shows that only 21% of employees in Serbia reported such changes, and the let's say the highest share of workers reporting such changes can be then found in Albania, which is 35. Again, the levels are much lower than in the EU 27, and also if compared to Israel. What is, however, important here, that there is, let's say, the uneven distribution or uneven exposure to digitalization. And we find that, and this is similar also to the EU countries, that mostly this is reported by workers with advanced skills or workers that work in the sectors of ICT or financial and insurance services. What is important also here, and also mentioned by Kostas previously, we can also observe or understand the extent to which the employees are exposed to digital upskilling. And what can be seen that these changes at the workplace are actually not sufficiently accompanied by the digital upskilling. So looking at the share of the employees who have learned to use new digital technologies for the main job, and here referring again to the different softwares, but also computerized machines, we see that that the extent to which workers in Western Balkan 5 economies are exposed to such learning is very small. So we have only 12% of workers in Serbia reporting on such type of learning, and maximum 16% of such workers in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is much, much lower than in the EU 27 and Israel, again showing that there is a significant potential in supporting such workers in further upskilling and reskilling. Again, here, looking at the different groups of workers, what is important is that the access to the digital upskilling is again uneven, and it's more likely for workers from, let's say, more skilled and qualified workers and workers working in skilled occupations to take part in such type of learning. As Kostas showed before, we were also interested in understanding whether we can see similar or same patterns when it comes to the impact of new digital technologies on job design. And indeed, we can see that our results calculated for the Western Balkan 5 economies resemble to the findings from the EU plus countries. So again, focusing on the question and on the understanding how the tasks of the employees change after having learned new digital technologies, we see a similar picture. So most of the workers report on let's say, balance change in task content. So losing or having some tasks to be automated, but also being required to perform some new or different tasks than before. In the West, if looking at the Western Balkan 5 economies, we see that the automation is very much, let's say, or impacts the jobs of male workers that are, let's say, older, here specifically the age group 45 and 54. Also, in terms of occupation, we see that it's more common among clerical support workers, professional, and also in the finance sector and also the sector of professional, scientific, and technical services. What can be maybe mentioned here that in contrast to the EU countries, we see the extent to which automation takes place is, for example, lower in more traditional sectors such as agriculture. What we also looked at is the issue of skills mismatch. As the survey allows us to look at different type of skills mismatch, being it vertical, horizontal, but also skills underutilization, so the level to which workers use their skills and knowledge in their jobs. We see that the majority of employees use their skills only to a limited extent. So minority says that they use their current knowledge and skills to a large extent. When it comes to the vertical mismatch, we see that about 1/4 of workers work below or above their qualification, and also about 2/3 of employees in the surveyed economies from Western Balkan 5, they work in line with their specialization or field of study. Here we also looked at, or we started to look at the determinants, or who are the mismatched workers. So we clearly see that the issue of our qualification when looking at the vertical skills mismatch is especially important for those in tertiary education, younger workers. We also see here something which is also mentioned in the analysis is for the EU countries, inverse relation between being overqualified and job complexity. When it comes to digital skills intensity, we see a bit more complex picture when looking at the Western Balkan economies, as a large share of overqualified workers still work in jobs requiring, let's say, higher degree of digital skills. So last few findings that I would like to just point out is the areas where the employees need or are in need of strengthening their skills, and these are the digital and social skills patterns that we see across all Western Balkan 5 economies, but also findings that are in line with the findings that are shown for the EU27 and also Israel. As also Kostas mentioned, there is an important issue of perception, so the need for improving the skills, but also the awareness of how skills will, or how skills will be, or demand for skills will be impacted by the digital transition and technological advancement is higher among specific groups of workers. And again, it's higher among those that have tertiary education, that work in skilled occupations. In case of Western Balkan economies, it's also higher among younger workers, which of course then points out to specific groups of workers that may be left behind and need to be supported in order to ensure their integration on the labor market. And last slide that I would like to show is the participation in training that is related to the job-related skills. As mentioned by our director previously, the share of workers that participated in education or training activities ranges from 32% in Serbia to 53% in Kosovo. So this is much lower than in the EU27. And what is important is that only 1/3 of those workers took part in training that aimed to develop their digital skills. And again, we see a certain degree of polarization, and we can identify through the survey also the vulnerable groups or the groups that need to be prioritized when it comes to reskilling and upskilling, and those are older workers, those with lower education, workers in elementary manual jobs, or informal workers. So I think very much also in line with the findings from the EU countries. And I think I will stop here. I believe that the survey brings novel evidence. It brings also very important findings when it comes to the planning of the EU intervention, which is also an important, let's say, interest of the ETF, and also supports, let's say, supports the kind of key messages that there is a need for reskilling, upskilling, flexible learning pathways, and most importantly, that there is a need for prioritization of upskilling and reskilling for specific groups of people in order to ensure their participation on the labor market in the context of technological advancements. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva, for a presentation that I found very much exciting, and I'm pretty certain that our participants also found very exciting. It really showcases the value of the survey, and it also shows how what a challenge we have upon us which is to also try to ensure that we put the different databases together, the one from the EU and the one that the ETF has collected, and engage in further analysis and further understanding of the different factors and determinants which could potentially explain and underpin these wide country differences that we are observing and seeing in our databases. I will now pass on the floor to the next speaker, Seamus McGuinness. Before doing so, allow me to say that I've seen that there are many interesting questions also posed on the chat facility, and we intend to come back to those immediately after Seamus' presentation. So Professor Seamus McGuinness is a research professor and research area coordinator on labour market research at the Economic and Social Research Institute in Dublin, Ireland, adjunct professor at Trinity College Dublin. Professor McGuinness is a highly esteemed researcher on issues related to skill mismatch and economics of education, and he has published widely and has more or less built the foundations for research that has been taking place on the issue of skill mismatch over the past couple of decades. I should also just highlight that Professor McGuinness is one of the main experts and pillars who has assured the high quality of the survey, being a member of the European Skills and Job Survey Expert Working Group since the first wave of the survey. So Seamus, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and we really much look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Costas. So if we could load the presentation, that would be fantastic. It's been operated from the Sadifop side.
I invite our colleagues at the ICT to share the presentation. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to present and speak at today's conference. I think it's really fantastic to see the second wave of the European Skills and Jobs Survey, the preliminary results emerging. In terms of the data set itself, and particularly the first wave of the data, it has been the key tool for developing the understanding of general skill issues, particularly and also around aspects of that around skill mismatch, but a wide spectrum of skill and labour market issues in Europe for the best part of the last decade. So it's really great to see the second wave now starting to produce some outputs. So today I'm going to talk a little bit, as Costa said, about an area that I've been involved in for a substantial period of time, skill mismatches. And really this is an overview discussion in terms of what do we know about them, why are they important, and what do we really need to know going forward? Well, the first thing to know is that skill mismatch is a very general term that describes a range of imbalances between the demand and the supply of skills in the labour market. And they can take many different forms. They can manifest themselves very differently. Some are measured from the perspective of the employer, some from the perspective of the worker. Many are interrelated with each other, and all at least have the potential to be damaging from the perspective of either the employer, the employee, and the macroeconomy. So if we could have the next slide, please. So here are some of the main areas of skill mismatch that we hear mentioned in policy discussion and we see in the academic literature. From the perspective of the employee, first of all, a lot of the mismatches that we hear about, and we've heard some mention of them in the previous discussion, are vertical mismatches. This measures the extent to which the employee is deemed or deems themselves to have more human capital, whether that's measured in terms of education or skills, or less human capital relative to what their job currently requires. So the main one that we would hear a lot about is over education. So this would describe an individual who is perceived to have more education than the job requires. So this, for example, would be a graduate in a job that only requires a high school diploma. And the flip side of that is undereducation. This is a worker who is deemed to have less education than their job requires. So this is the person with a high school diploma in a job that typically requires a degree. A related concept to over-education and under-education is overskilling and underskilling. This is where the surplus or deficits in education are measured in terms of skills and competencies rather than education, but they are related concepts. So someone who is overskilled is in a job where they feel that they have more skills and abilities than the job requires. Someone who is underskilled perceives themselves to have not enough skills and abilities relative to what the job requires. Another concept that we see and we've heard mentioned in the previous presentation is horizontal mismatch. This is where a person is working in a job that is unrelated to their field of study. So, for example, someone with an engineering degree working as a librarian. And another concept that I haven't put up here is the concept of skills obsolescence. And this is something that's extremely important. So this is where a person's skills are no longer required in the labour market, and economics obsolescence, for example, would result as a result of automation and AI, where people's tasks or their job is being replaced by technology. So it's something that is at the forefront of policy concern. Then from the perspective of the employer, the skill mismatches that we generally hear about are firstly skill gaps. This is where the employer said that my current staff do not have the required, are not skilled enough to do their jobs competently. And this would be related to the concepts of undereducation and underskilling measured at the level of the employee. And finally, the one that we hear a lot about in terms of the policy debate is skill shortages. This describes a situation where the employer is having difficulty filling a job or a vacancy as a consequence of a shortage of suitably qualified people in the external labour market. So next, I want to talk a little bit about where the evidence base around all of these forms of skill mismatch actually sits. So if we could have the next slide, please. So this is a table from a paper that was published in the Journal of Economic Surveys with Kostas Pouliakis and Paul Redmond. And as you can see, we reviewed the number of studies on all of these various forms of skill mismatch that were in the peer-reviewed literature over the period 2006 to 2017. And what you can see is that the most of those studies were actually on one area, which was over-education. There was relatively little on overskilling, but when you look at the employer-based skill mismatches, skill gaps and skill obsolescence, there was just a handful of papers, just over 10 papers on those issues, 10 studies published over that 11-year period. So, and the next slide, please. And here we have updated that table for a forthcoming book chapter, and you can see that nothing has actually changed, that imbalance in the evidence base is still there. So basically, studies of overeducation account for about 55% of all studies that were published in the areas of skill mismatch over the last 15 years, where studies of, for example, skills shortages account for around 3% of everything that was studied. So why is that the case? It is just simply the case that the evidence base is data driven. It's quite easy to execute a study of overeducation. All you need is a labour force survey with information on an individual's age, their wage, their education level, and their occupation. So it is much more complex to study skill shortages, because you need a very bespoke survey that has captured the hiring activities of firms, how long they've been recruiting, who they've been recruiting, and also information in terms of their productivity and the profitability and their performance levels. So the next slide, please. So you can see here, looking at the number of estimates of overeducation, it isn't correlated with the extent of the problem in particular countries. So we see that the number of studies on overeducation was highest for Belgium. That's just because Belgium has a great data infrastructure. If you look at countries where overeducation is a bigger problem, like Ireland and Greece, actually there's very few studies of overeducation for those countries over the period, and that simply reflects the structure of the evidence base in those countries isn't as developed as countries like Belgium and the UK or Spain and Germany. So what are the stylized facts from all of this research? What do we know in terms of what are the impacts of all these various forms of skill mismatch? The next slide, please. So as we've heard from a previous presentation, based on the second iteration of the European Skills and Jobs Survey, things haven't changed that much. So the stylized facts, when we looked across the literature, found that the average incidence of overeducation was around 25%, 1 in 4 workers, with an average pay penalty associated with that of around 13.5%. So this is relative to workers who are with similar levels of education who are matched. So when you think of that, 1 in 4 workers earning a wage penalty of around 10%. If that 10% represents potential lost productivity potential, and you add that up across all workers across in the economy, that would translate to potentially to a very big macroeconomic effect. When we look at undereducation, the average incidence was around 16%, but we didn't find consistent evidence of pay penalty. So the productivity costs associated with undereducation are less clear. Overskilling, again, this reflects and is related to overeducation. The incidence there was 1 in 5 workers. A pay penalty was there consistently, the average being around 7.5%. Underskilling, again, with inconsistent what we find with undereducation, about 1 in 4 workers deemed themselves to be undereducated, but we didn't see consistent wage impacts, which would suggest that there may not be big productivity costs associated with that. So the next slide, please. In terms of horizontal mismatch, so this is the instance where the engineers working as a librarian, around just under 40% of workers, and this is really measured for graduates, were horizontally mismatched, but again, there were no evidence of consistent wage effects. So then let's come to the impacts in terms of the skill mismatches that occur amongst employers. For skill gaps, we find little consistent evidence on the very thin evidence base that there were productivity impacts arising from skill gaps in firms. But again, this is in a very, very small number of studies. For skill shortages, again, we had only 13 studies over that period. The first thing to note was actually there doesn't even appear to be a consistent approach to measuring skill shortages. Some papers use hard to fill vacancies, some unfilled vacancies, some just use subjective responses from employers. And there was no consistent evidence there, again, of a strong productivity factor arising from these skill shortages. One important study that did actually look really below the bonnet of skill shortages was carried out by SADIFOP some years ago, looking at the 2010 Euro Barometer survey. And that survey found around 47% of firms in the EU from that sample had said that they had difficulty in recruiting graduates. But when SADIFOP looked below that, the bonnet of that, the vast majority of those apparent skills shortages were not deemed to be genuine. Just over 10% of them were deemed to be genuine. The rest were due to the fact that the firm either wasn't offering, for example, the competitive wage or inefficient HRM policies and recruitment policies. So the next slide, please. So this leads us to a paradox, really, in terms of where the evidence base is. We have an abundance of evidence on the costs associated with surplus human capital, particularly measured by overeducation and overskilling, but not much in terms of skill gaps and skill shortages and skill obsolescence. But when you look at where the policy action is in this area, you'll find right across the European Union, whether that's at a commission level or at a country level, where we hear skill mismatches are being talked about and policy initiated, that's really to counter skill shortages and to a lesser extent skill gaps. And you see very little policies implemented to counter surplus forms of skill mismatch, vertical mismatches. So policy tends to be concentrated in the area that evidence is the thinnest. So I'll just shoot through there. The next slide, please. So just focusing on overeducation, there is this belief maybe that overeducation has been driven by an expansion of higher education. Actually, overeducation is not increasing in all European countries which have expanded higher education. It's increasing in some, it's static in others, it's falling in others. And here's a graph. This looks at the people aged 25 to 29. So these are the people that reflect where the education system is now. And we see that while educational attainment, that's the level ISCIT 5, graduate attainment is increasing over time, actually overeducation is falling. So there's actually an inverse relationship between overeducation and educational expansion. It tends to be falling in the countries where higher education is expanding the most. Next slide, please. So that's not to say that there isn't an important role for supply side policies. We know that over education is really, a lot of it is down to information asymmetries, the mismatch between the information that employers have and employees have. So we find that universities have an important role in smoothing out those asymmetries, and particularly where graduate career services are involved in the graduate finding the job, or where the work placements are involved, then skill mismatches tend to be much lower. Also, in terms of the components, how teaching takes place in universities, where there is a higher emphasis on practical skills-based knowledge research programs and facts and learning within the degree program, again, this tends to lower the incidence of skill mismatch for subsequent graduates. Next slide, please. But a lot of information is missing. We don't know anything really about the demand side. What are the role of employer practices, for example, in driving these forms of mismatch, particularly the ones that we are most worried about? Surplus skills and surplus over education, over skilling, and also skills shortages and skills gaps. So I've listed a range of information that we would need here in terms of things that are potentially important for understanding skill mismatches that are demand side related. For example, the organisation of labour within the firm, how contracts are arranged, recruitment policies and HR practices, flexible working arrangements, the skills and competencies of managers, training intensity. All of this has potentially important implications for skill mismatches, and we don't capture any of those in the data that currently exists. So next slide. So finally, what do we need? We need much better data to really understand skill mismatches going forward. We need to understand exactly what are the role of the supply side and the demand side and the interaction between demand and supply side factors. And that can only be achieved by proper investment in a data source that captures both of these, which would be a linked employer-employee data set. I believe that the European Skills and Jobs Survey provides good infrastructure because it is an excellent, captures everything that we need to know about the worker. But if that can be appended with an employer component and captured over time, then we would be in a much better position to inform policy on skill mismatches and giving it a proper evidence base. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Seamus, and also thanks to the previous two speakers, Kostas and Eva. Could you maybe open your camera, because I think now it's time to take a few questions. So also, Eva, if you could open. Yes, there you are. Great. So I think overall, I would, I've looked at the questions in the chat. I would like to ask each of you one question. Because several questions cover similar issues, so I think we can easily do that. So the first question is for Kostas. Several people have said, okay, you have now these findings, but now the last months, what's really in the spotlight is generative AI. If you have to respond, does the survey cover that fully? And do you have any plans to look at that in more detail? Costa.
Thank you, Jasper, and thank you very much for the question. In brief, we tried to get as much information as possible on AI, or we considered trying to get as much information as possible on AI as part of the second European Skills and Jobs Survey. But of course, one thing is to discuss about these issues, and it's another to actually develop a proper way and proper survey instruments to measure it, and also to ensure that respondents and people who are being asked can actually give you informed responses. So at that time, asking people on whether or not they're using AI as part of their work was deemed to be relatively dangerous to do so, because many people don't know if they're actually using AI technologies as part of their job. AI, as you know, is sometimes masked in what we call navigating our applications on our smartphone. AI is using Google search engine. AI is many things which people do not necessarily know or associated with the use of AI. So that's one reason why we did not pay too much attention on the issue, whereas we try to ensure that we cover the broader scope of digital technologies, focusing on both computer software and computerized machinery, and not only on AI. Having said that, we are currently now developing at ZFOP a specific AI European Skills and Job Survey supplement, which we plan to execute and carry out very soon at the beginning of 2024. It will be a small supplement with a specific focus on getting more information on AI from a small sample of the EU workforce. And I would like to conclude saying, however, that we should keep at the back of our mind that even at the time that we designed the second European Skills and Job Survey, there was a huge, let's say, technological alarmism present in the media and the popular debate. And when we asked EU workers to what extent they have to program or use AI algorithms as part of their job, we only find that around 1 to 2%. Well, maybe in some countries it goes up to 4 to 5% of workers actually use AI algorithms as part of their job. This doesn't mean that a much larger share of the workforce is affected by AI. But the point I'm trying to make is that we should always keep at the back of our minds that it's a very small share of the EU workforce who actually works with these type of technologies. And typically, despite the fear that it has in terms of job destruction, if you look at history, if you look at the contemporary evidence, we very seldom see negative effects on employment. And typically, we see these sort of complementary effects. So maybe some workers, some jobs are being affected, but typically you also have a lot of new jobs, new tasks being created, new type of activities that workers carry out in their job. So there can also be a beneficial impact on job quality as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and thanks. That's very, very illuminating. And I think it was also very nice that you mentioned the future plans, that we're looking deeper into this issue quite soon, actually. The second question I would have for Eva is about the potential of this information, in the context of sector or industry clusters. Do you have any plans to somehow structurally support, let's say, stakeholders on the ground with this kind of new evidence that you now have?
Yeah, I think this is one of, let's say, the beauty of this survey, that we can really look at the different breakdowns and also draw messages. Of course, limiting to the sample size and all the technical issues that we, of course, face, that we can draw for the specific sectors. And in the non-EU countries, so in the enlargement region, I think it's particularly important. And we will try to provide input to the different discussions that are taking place, and also support, let's say, the development and discussion at the sectoral level. So indeed, we will aim to use that evidence for a very hands-on, practical advice to the countries.
Okay, thanks. Last question, and Seamus, I would like to ask you to be brief. The question is, we're currently speaking about specific tasks being affected by technological change, and in that reality, would it make sense, in your view, to reformulate mismatch measures in terms of tasks instead of skills? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yes, it makes sense. But we already have been doing that. So if we look even back at the Reflex data set and other data sets that will typically ask, including the European Jobs and Skills Survey, at a task-based level, they'll ask individuals to what extent are you competent in a particular task, and then they will also be asked to what extent is this required in your job. So and using that, you can derive task-based measures of mismatch. So yeah, it is important, but it is being done within the literature.
Okay, thanks very much. I think I'm looking at the clock. It's high time we move to the final part of this virtual get-together, which is the panel discussion. Apologies to the speakers for being a little bit delayed. In the panel discussion today, we will discuss with experts to reflect from different perspectives on how we can make digital transition work for all. And I'm very happy, and I would ask tech support to spotlight the panelists now. I'm very happy to introduce to you, first of all, Ken Mayhew, Ken is an emeritus professor of education and economic performance at Oxford University and emeritus fellow in economics at Pembroke College. Ken is also the founding director of the multidisciplinary research center on skills, knowledge, and economic performance called SCOPE in the UK. Okay, there you are, Ken. Welcome.
Hi.
And then we have with us Mladen Furukovsky, who is a labor market specialist in the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy in North Macedonia. He is responsible for employment policies and measures and for monitoring their effects and results. And last but certainly not least, Fanny Serret. Fanny is policy officer in the European Commission Director General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations, or in short also DG NEAR. Fanny works on human capital development, employment, social protection and youth issues to support the policy dialogue with EU neighborhood countries and the programming of EU assistance. So welcome to you all and thanks for joining. To the audience, in the meantime, also feel free to keep asking questions and please do that in the chat. So I would like to start with a question to Ken. Could you tell us in broad lines what research and empirical findings say about what makes digital transition work for all? What are the critical factors that make digital transition inclusive? And as a third question, I realize it's many questions. Do you think policy and policy implementation are on the right track? Ken, the floor is yours.
Well, to get a good answer to this question, it's all about predicting the future, and predicting future skill demands is fraught with difficulty. Surveys such as the Skills and Jobs Survey provide incredibly useful information about the present, give us some clues about the future, but of course they're not designed to be forecasts or predictions. There's a fashion in a number of countries, including mine at the moment, for occupational projections. You project occupations and you then forecast or predict the demand for skills by looking at task-based things like ONET. That, to my mind, is of very limited use because, of course, there'll be changing tasks within occupations, and ONET or ESCO can't pick that up. So massive uncertainty about the future. Even the AI and industry experts are uncertain about what's going to happen. So when we're preparing for policy, we're preparing in this incredibly uncertain world. My guess, for what it's worth, two guesses. One is there won't be a destruction of jobs as a whole, but jobs will change. And the big question is what will happen to the average quality of jobs? And my guess is, in fact, they'll fall. The second guess is that there'll be a huge demand for digital training, but it will, for the vast majority of the workforce, be at relatively low levels and relatively short training episodes. So I've only got a couple of minutes. So just to pick out a couple of policy issues for three groups: those currently in the education system, those currently in work, and those who are out of work or are about to lose their jobs because of the sort of structural change AI is going to cause. But the education system, obviously, our educational providers have to be nimble and flexible in providing the appropriate courses at any given time. But I think the most important thing is for the education system at all levels to actually provide the basic skills in maths and literacy and so on, so that people have learned to learn, because that's a really important thing for individuals coping with the future. And part of that is actually thinking skills. And if I was a policymaker, I'd be very concerned about whether my educational system was actually teaching people to learn and to think as opposed to learn and churn approaches. If we looked at those in work, I think the great worry there is, again, about the ability to learn, because there's a fascinating finding from the Skills and Jobs Survey that huge widespread presence of low quality jobs. Nearly 1 in 4 adults don't use any simple numerical calculations or have to read text. More than half of European jobs, adults don't have discretion how they do tasks and work. There's a form of thinking obsolescence and that makes it very difficult for such people to suddenly retrain. Employers have to be flexible. Again, if I was a policymaker, I'd be concerned about budgets. And if it's a matter of having to train relatively low-level digital skills, I'd be very reluctant as a government to subsidize employers, who are very ready to accept subsidies in most circumstances. But the more any policymaker can do to make that the responsibility of the employer, the better. When it comes to the higher level skills, again, I think it's rather important that as far as possible, policymakers encourage employers to engage in that training themselves, rather than to go to the market to start trying to buy the skills in the external market. That, I think, could cause chaos. So the employer has a critical role there, and I'm not sure that all governments are terribly good at encouraging them to play that role. But what about those who are out of work or are about to lose their jobs? That's where the scarce government resource obviously should be concentrated in terms of government spending. Research teaches us some very interesting lessons there. The first lesson on, going back generations on active labour market policy is training on its own has relatively little impact for such people unless it's accompanied simultaneously with career advice, job guidance, and even job placement. And the big question for policymakers there are your local labour market information systems good enough to provide that ALM facility? And are your public services in terms of careers guidance and so on and job placement good enough to work there? I'd also say it raises a question of, for this group and for all adults in the labour market, who does the training? Are we looking at specialist training providers? Are we looking at in-house training? Are we looking at our tertiary education system taking on a hugely increased role in short course training for adults? I think that's a huge question, both for policymakers and for those who run, in the British context, further education colleges, and even more importantly, higher education colleges. So the bottom line for me is that many people will have to adjust, and adjust quite rapidly, to changes, and very uncertain changes, and changes which are very hard to predict well ahead of time. But the changes that most people have to make in terms of digital skills will be manageable. I pick up a lot of Costas's points here, that it isn't a stark future here. In a well-organized system where people are able to learn, for most people, it will be relatively short training episodes, in my view. That's not to downplay it. A lot's needed to be in place to make that work. Role of employers, absolutely central here. And I speak very much from a British perspective here, where, in my view, our employers too often abrogate their responsibilities, either to the external market or to the education system. And I think if one is comparing countries here, those countries where employers have an institutional setup where there's collective action are going to operate more effectively than other countries where there isn't that tradition. So a few random thoughts to which I'm happy to return if you wish.
Well, they don't sound very random to me. In fact, for me, it clearly, I think, outlines the simple fact that also policymakers have choices, and that many things don't happen by themselves. I mean, there's a case to be made for organizing things in the way that makes sense, and also takes into account the job quality, fairness dimensions, etc. So I think that's fantastic. This is a short panel, so we cannot have follow-up questions now. So I would like to move directly to the second speaker, and thanks very much, by the way, Ken, for your great contribution. Second speaker is Mladen, and Mladen is working in, let's say, more the policy implementation part of things. So my question to you would be, alongside policy setting and policy implementation, the third pillar of digital policy making is, of course, establishing also what works and what does not work. So in North Macedonia, the country where you are, you completed an impact assessment in 2022 of active labor market measures. Could you tell us a little bit about that impact assessment? I think it's actually linked to the previous speaker, Ken, because this concerned a training for advanced IT skills. Maybe you could say a little bit about the type of training, how you evaluated, and what the results were.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Mladen Frčkovski, Head of Labor Market Unit in the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy. I worked on the labor market issue more than 15 years. I'm the coordinator of the Youth Guarantee Scheme in North Macedonia, also the coordinator of the creation and implementation on the annual operational plan for active labor market measures, coordinator for the National Strategy of Employment. So I am very involved in each of the policies that we created on the national level related to the employment. So I will speak directly to the active labor market measures. This operational plan consists of various types of active labor market measures. Some of them are lead to the direct employment, like self-employment by grant, subsidizing the wages and financial help for the legal entities for their economic growth. And the other types of measures are that we help to the unemployed people registered in the employment service agency, like actively job seekers, to be to get their skills on the real working conditions in the companies. And I must say that the interest for the trainings are lower than the interest for the measures that lead to direct employment, because of the specific economic situation in Republic of North Macedonia. For example, if you see the annual reports of the Agency of Employment, you will notice that the most of the registered unemployed people are with low secondary school, low primary school, and not finished secondary school. So the most of them, there are more than 80% of the total evidence of the active labor, of the active job seekers that are registered like unemployed persons. So regarding to the European delegation's notice, we involved the unemployed people with at least finish primary school starting from the last year, because especially in the trainings, in the real working conditions, because we want to make them more employable on the labor market, to be more competitive on the labor market, to get some skills. And some of that measures show better results than the others. It depends of the attractiveness of the measures for the unemployed persons. For example, we have trainings for the demand occupations on the labor market. That is the more attractive. That is the most attractive for unemployed persons, because the title of the measure show everything. For example, we made analyze not only from the Agency of Employment, but only from the Chambers of Commerce for their validate organization of employers, and also from the State Statistical Office. And we decided to choose at least 10 the most interesting, the most attractive and most demanded occupations from the both sides, not only from the demand side but also for the supply side. And almost each year, that is 100% realized that measure. And after some period of time, especially after this, the 6 months of the finishing of that measure, And especially 1 year after finishing of that measure, we noticed that rapidly increased the total number of employed people who successfully finished the trainings. That is also the situation for the trainings of advanced IT skills. Firstly, we decided from 2019 to start to implement this measure, training for advanced IT skills, because we noticed that the most, especially young people from 15 to 29, are the most interested for this type of trainings. And firstly, we communicate with the especially Chamber of Commerce because they have several sectors, and one of the sectors is for the IT skills, and they send to us the most attractiveness IT packets, advanced IT packets that are well paid, that can easily find job after finishing that IT trainings. And until last year, that measure was offered only for the young people up to 29 years old, with at least finished secondary school, because for the advanced IT skills, we cannot allow to the unemployed people registered in the ESA to go in for the advanced IT skills, because they should have some elementary knowledge. For example, to know English, because all the trainings, advanced IT skills, is on English, is not on Macedonian. And at the end, they should take exam from they should make the final exam directly to the Microsoft. So if they not finish at once, they have opportunity to go next time, another time. But after that, if cannot finish totally this training, we give them offer to pay by themselves to get the certificate from the Microsoft. So we help them twice to get the certificate from the Microsoft. But if they cannot, their own expenditures to pay the exam. We noticed we analyzed the 2020 and 2021. I cannot go before because it's more relevant in 2020 and 2021. We noticed that the total number of employed people after the successful finishing of the advanced IT skills is in 2020 55.5% of total number of the persons who go on that type of training. But in the 2021, it increased for the 10 percentage points. It goes to the 65.9% in 2021 that successfully finish and get job after finishing of the advanced IT skills. These numbers, these percentages encourage us to go on with the implementation of these active labor market measures, because we also some private agencies make analysis that the most of the young people, the new generations, are interested for this type of trainings, because before implementing some of the new type of measures, I can mention like trainings for advanced IT skills, we noticed that the average period from school to work is about 2.5 years. We don't take the education level. It's total. No, it's total period of the starting with the first job after finishing the school. So we must change the strategy to be shorter the period of the transition from school to job. So one of the strategic activities is through this active labor market measures, advanced IT skills.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And next year also we will go on with this measure. It's planned to be implemented. So that's the point about these trainings.
Thanks. Interesting. Maybe we get back to some of the issues later in the questions. So I would like to move to Fanny. Now, we earlier heard about the differences in digital transition between EU countries and countries in the EU neighborhood. Fanny, you work with countries in the European neighborhood, and I would like to ask you, could you tell us a little bit about your approach and some of the instruments that you're using to promote education and in particular digital skills? Maybe you can give some examples as well and some of the lessons that you learned doing that work.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, I work in DG NEAR A3, supporting colleagues working for geographic units in headquarters and in delegation in the enlargement and the neighborhood countries. Thank you on behalf of DG NEAR to CDFOP and ETF for the great work and the very timely and useful survey that is really coming at the right time, as it was mentioned earlier. Yes, indeed. So we have a policy first approach, meaning that we support our partner countries on their reform pathways to build inclusive societies and economies, promoting sustainable growth with policy dialogue, technical and financial assistance, as well as investments. In the three regions we work with, we have adopted economic and investment plans where human capital, skills, and digital skills are among the priority and flagships. To give you an example, as it was already mentioned by Mladen, in the Western Balkan, the Youth Guarantee is a flagship of the Economic and Investment Plan, and it's also a good example of our work. So together with DG Employment, the ILO, and ETF, we are supporting the region, providing technical assistance for the preparation and implementation of the Youth Guarantee. There, North Macedonia is a pioneer and also helping peers with their experience. We see that for the Youth Guarantee, we are also bringing the experience of the EU member states. So we use our instrument TAIEX to bring them together this year in the context of the European Year of Skills. We are having a series of workshops also with great support from ETF. So we had one in Brussels, one in Lisbon, where it was really interesting to see how in the context of the Youth Guarantee, and this also relates to what Ken just mentioned, it's important to bring employers and social partners in the design of apprenticeship and traineeship schemes to ensure that they are relevant and that they will bring the students really fit for the labor market. So this is a good example. We will have next TAIEX workshop in Vienna to look at the Austrian model, and we see that the Youth Guarantee is also a good example because it's a catalyzer for reforms. So it requires reforms in the labor market, the education, the social sectors, modernization of the labor market information systems to understand what jobs will be required, what are the skills that require, as also can mention, maybe short training programs that can be included, but also in the education and the vet system. So it's for us a very interesting approach to work across sectors. So not only education, but also employment, social policies, reform for also insurance at the workplace. So this is a more comprehensive approach. So this is an example. Of course, we see also that in our work we need skills for all the reforms in different sectors. So education and digital skills are considered enablers for all type of reforms that we are supporting. And also we need to take into account this evolving context we are working in now. In our partner countries, we have seen different crises. We had the COVID, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, and natural disasters. Now, more recently, what is going on in Gaza. So all those crises are, of course, impacting the education and the skills. And we see that we need to prepare resilience and education systems to adapt to these constant shocks and crises. So this is also an important element, and why also mentioned by Candice, supporting the capacity to learn how to learn. And so, for example, we support early childhood education and care for this because we are aware that in the first 5 years of life, determinant connections are made and in the brain. So we see that this is important to focus on this pillar. We also need to look at indeed the context, and we all heard recently the speech on the State of the Union, and we see that the enlargement is back on the agenda. So we have now also additional 3 candidates for EU enlargement. And more particularly for the Western Balkans, the President of the Commission also announced a growth plan for the Western Balkans, which will also include reform agenda where education and digital skills are identified as priorities. So each economy in the Western Balkan will now be supported on these reforms for the coming year. So this is a very important element to mention. We also see in the context of the European Year of Skills, also something important for both the EU and our partner countries is the preparation of the EU talent pool, where we see that the EU is also needing skills, but we see here a risk for our partner countries that will need also those same skills for green and digital transition to happen and to be fair. So this is for us important to ensure that there is here a win-win situation. We are also working, taking into account this digitalization and the development of the artificial intelligence. So for us, of course, the evidence gathered by ETF is paramount to know more and to take this into account in our policy work. As mentioned earlier, also regarding labor market mismatch, we try to also work on addressing those and looking at also brain drain in partner countries. So here as well, with support of ETF, we try to work on this, and maybe to give you some examples. So on education overall for DigiNear, we have around 26 programs with a budget of more than 900 million euro for just the period between 21 and 23. And this is even without the Erasmus Plus program. And for this allocation, VET is around more than 19%. So it gives an idea of the size of our support. And of course, we try to link the programming with the policy. And for this as well, we work closely with ETF. And we have developed an instrument which is called Education Diagnostic that we implement together with partner countries to really identify priorities and co-create recommendations for the short to long term regarding education and skills development. So this has been already done in Lebanon, in several Western Balkan countries, and it's going to be also launched in the East. Maybe to accelerate a bit, I don't want to keep you too long.
I think maybe you've given very nice, interesting examples. I think maybe what we always do in this virtual get together is also to give, let's say, the panelists opportunities to ask each other questions. And I was wondering, maybe there would be, we have a couple of minutes left. There would be room for such questions. So I would ask maybe Ken or Mladen to see if there's questions among the 3 of you that you would like to hear about.
I'd like to ask Fanny a question. Thanks for that, Fanny. Fascinating stuff. Huge amount of money being spent. And there are 2 related questions. When you're engaging with any given country, a lot of stuff is happening on education. How much are you looking at the labour market needs? Is that a secondary thing? Is there any formal forecasting? And second, given so much money is being spent, Are you setting targets of any sort? Are you planning evaluations of the expenditure?
And Fanny, please respond, but try to keep it short, if that's at all possible. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I will be brief. So indeed, more and more we try to have more evidence and identify the needs. So let's say that we are trying to also work across sectors more together. So when we plan something in the field of the education, we check the evidence that we have gathered for both the need of the education sector per se, but as well to link it with the other priorities that are identified for the countries. So really to connect what is being done in the education with the other reforms. So in terms of priorities for digital and green transformation, for example, this is the case. And of course, there are evaluation, and with some of our program, let's say there are some criteria for the disbursement. So this is something that we use in our assistance.
Hani, would you have a question in return to one of the other speakers?
Maybe I can ask a question to Mladen. So maybe related to your experience related to the youth guarantee, and how also the let's say the digital skills component. So do you see that there is both demand and the result? You mentioned some initial impact regarding active labor market measure, but more specifically on the youth guarantee, if you can say a short word on the digital skills component.
Mladen, please keep it short. Thanks. You're muted.
Now it's okay?
Now it's good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Fanny, digital skills are the most important now, because it's you know, our youth guarantee scheme is divided into 3 pillars. The third pillar is the most important, that the system of the implementation of the youth guarantee scheme go to Employment Service Agency, where they offered various type of services to the unemployed people, and also active labor market measures. We must go on with the digital agenda of the Europe and green agenda of Europe, and we will force in the next period the increasing the scope of the number of the unemployed people go to the trainings for the advanced IT skills. Also, we have measure for developing the green economy in Macedonia, and we must taking into account that the characteristic of the enterprises in Macedonia are not so good, because the most of the companies are micro and small companies. More than 82%, the last data from the State Statistical Office, are micro and small enterprises. So we must help them not only with the advanced IT skills, but also with the other types of trainings to prepare the new workforce for those enterprises, because there is a big mismatch on the skills between the needs of the companies from the one side, and that can be offered by the registered unemployed people.
Yes, I think it's very interesting point. I'm looking at the clock.
Okay.
I think you know, if we could rely on you, you know, if people have follow-up questions, that they could get back in touch with you individually.
Okay.
And we try to really be on time with these things. So I think the things you said is very important.
Yes.
And also very much linked to what Ken said earlier about the need to involve employers. I think that's crucial.
Yes.
We have to wrap up this meeting, and to do that, I've heard that our executive director managed to get to the screen. So Jürgen, please take the floor.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yes. First of all, I have to apologize again for sort of not being available for opening this because I gathered more minutes of delay on a train trip that is actually shorter than the delay it, and in the end had 80 minutes. Sorry for that, but it was great listening in a bit later on, and I would like to start maybe with an observation because I still see Mladen on his camera. I think what was noteworthy of this meeting, when I first saw you in your intervention, your camera picture was a bit different now, and I thought for a moment we had finally managed to have an artificial intelligence speaking to us. Yes. So that was really looking great. But jokes aside, I think that it's fair to say that that the fact that reliable surveys that we have them and that the evidence that they produce and generate, that they are really key ingredients in shaping the policy that will eventually also make the digital transformation work for everyone. And the European Skills and Jobs Surveys, the 2 editions, they play this role at EU level, and for already quite a long time, almost a decade, they have been informing and influencing the policy debate. But now, with the extension to the neighborhood countries, I think it really provides additional added value. Additional added, maybe that's a tautology, but you know what I mean. So it's really an extension here. And because these surveys also help to map the digital divides between and within the EU, but also between the EU and the countries close to it, this information that they generate is really of also great importance and relevance for digitalization policies as such. So I think this was really a worthy experience running through these surveys and discussing them with you here today. And with that, Jasper, that's my very brief observation at the end, and I think we are still on time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jürgen, and I will close now the event. And before doing that closing, I would like to thank Jürgen, but also the ETF director for their interventions, our speakers, panelists, my set of colleagues, Beatrice and Zografia, and our ICT support who worked outside of the spotlight to make this event possible. And of course, you, the audience that was joining us from many different corners all across Europe. Finally, please remember to take 2 minutes of your time to fill out the evaluation form. We very much appreciate your feedback. And you can also already please note in your calendar the next virtual get-together, which will be about green transition. The virtual get-together, Greening Vocational Education and Training. What does it mean and what does it take? Will be on your screens on January 25th next year. We hope to see many of you join again. That is it from CEDEFOP and also from the European Training Foundation today. Thank you once again for joining and have a very nice rest of the day. Goodbye.
Goodbye, thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you, bye.
Thanks.